Thank you for joining me for another quick hits conversation. I'm Dr. Robyn. With me today, I have Frank Galindo and Connie Whitman. And I would like to talk about what do you do when life isn't fair? Frank, can you kick us off?
Sure. When life isn't fair, that the notion was kind of interesting to me because a lot of the things that I've done over the years is kind of matured and learned to not just take things as they come, but really think about why things happened the way that they did. People do a lot of finger pointing, people do a lot of blaming, and I think it takes a really strong and self-aware person to kind of look inside, right? Look in the mirror and see, well, something happened that wasn't quote unquote fair. Well, what does that mean exactly? Did I do something to influence that outcome? Did just something happen that I had no control over, and therefore, why bother weeping over that? Fair, again, is an objective term, right? Because fair to who? Fair to me? Fair to the person on the other end, right? Fair to the situation. It's an interesting point, and to me anyway, it comes down to, again, well, how do you frame that? And what does it mean? Is it really negative? Is it positive? Sometimes you really have to peel back the layers of the onion to find out if something that may seem unfair actually has an underlying reason or purpose to it. But again, that takes time to kind of to develop that kind of perspective. So that's what I think of when something doesn't turn out the way I want it to, in the terms of this concept of something being unfair and not just being the way that I would have liked it to be, right? Ideally speaking.
Yeah. You want me to go next, Robyn?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I agree with that. And I think two things are important that you said. One is unfair, who's defining what is fair and unfair, right? So we have our own filters that we're responding from. And the other thing I think is we peel back our own onion, we grow over time, that what we deem fair or unfair can absolutely change. So for me, when I read it, Robyn, when you send the topic, I was like, well, thank God she sent the topic first so I could percolate instead of, doing the humada, right? Like Ralph Cramden. But for me, I thought, isn't that funny when I've had situations through my life that deemed unfair, right? Oh, always happens to me, right? That woe is me perspective. Ironically, it could be a day later, an hour later, a year later, whatever that was, whatever that moment in time that was unfair actually should have happened for me to be in a better place. So the other thing you said, Frank, that I agree with is I think oftentimes when something we deem unfair at the moment, pause, because usually there's some hidden opportunity within that. But what happens, right? And we all do this. When things happen that are unfair, immediately our instinct is, and I'm going to say, pull a little tantrum, right? Like, oh man, and you get mad at yourself and mad at the situation. And why did this happen? And really, for me, when something unfair happens, I give myself 15 minutes to be a baby. And I could, say this stinks, but a little tantrum, right?
Yeah.
Then I go, 15 minutes is up, man. Is there an opportunity? Look at it with clarity, right? Stop being emotional and try to look at it from a logical perspective. And I do believe there's always a silver lining. So what is the potential silver lining? Or did I really dodge a bullet? So I think you have to allow yourself the emotional response because it's real. You're upset. But then we need to, I think, shift to the logic to see if there's an opportunity or maybe I did dodge a bullet.
When I was growing up, I grew up near a town called Turlock, and that's where the county fair was every year in the summer. And so if one of us as kids would say, that's not fair, my dad would say, if you want fair, go to Turlock in August. And that never was helpful. It always annoyed me. But he's kind of right. Like, life isn't fair. And I think as adults, we don't use that word as much. I mean, it means something in writing. It means something when we say it, but we don't think, oh, that wasn't fair. We think that was disrespected or someone pulled something over on me or, for me, if I'm sitting in line at a traffic light waiting to turn and someone zooms by and like cuts across, then I'm like, that's not fair. They shouldn't do that. That annoys me.
Right. That's a good point. We don't use that word, right? It was inappropriate, uncalled for. We just frame it differently as adults, right? Whether it's in personal or professional life. And you did say something, Connie, that is interesting, and it's something that I was struggling with, and I'm trying to get a hold on, is having that moment, right? Because we're human, and letting the emotion come through versus trying to control the emotion because you think that by controlling it, you're being proper, right? You're in control.
Yeah.
But that leads to other issues of bottling things up, right? Which is also unhealthy. It's unhealthy to throw a tantrum for 48 or 72 hours, right? Or go off on someone or whatever, basically negative expressions. But it's good to, and I think you have the time, like 15 minutes, right? 15 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is, let it out, be human, express yourself because it ticked you off or whatever. But then, okay, now let's take a step back. Now let's be the clear, self-aware, mature individual, and let's figure out, well, what happened and how do we work towards, I don't say avoiding the situation, but working towards a better outcome that's more favorable to what we were trying to accomplish in the first place.
Yeah. And if I could share, when I started my career, 100 years ago, and I got my licenses here in New Jersey, my Series 7 and all of my life and health licenses as well. And I spent a lot of money, and I was sponsored by by Prudential, but the office was down in Toms River. And so I spent thousands of dollars. I get licensed. I go back and I say, okay, what's my start date? They had a position for me, supposedly. And he was like, yeah, we don't have a position. And I was like, what do I do now? Here, I spent this money, right? I have no income coming in now because I had to leave my other job to get the licenses with the anticipation of, right, I'd have this job. And I said, well, thanks a lot. And I was so angry driving home from Toms River up to Central Jersey where I live. And he called another office, which was in Little Silver, which is actually closer to me, got me the job there. They had a position open. I interviewed with the regional, right? And they hired me and accepted me. That's how I met my husband. Had I gotten the job at Tom's, and I didn't meet my husband for 2 years, 2 years after that. So you see what I'm saying? I think we think unfair. How dare you make me spend this money and not have a job? But I really dodged a bullet because I never would have met my husband, and we're having our 30th anniversary. So I've now, at 60 years old, I think we learned, Frank, like you said, the human, have the emotion, but then look back and reflect. That happened, but look what happened. That was better. And I really try to live my life that way when something unfair happens to you, because usually there's silver lining somewhere.
Yep.
And how do we as adults, because we don't use the word fair, children say that.
That's right.
How do we notice that we feel like something is unfair so that we can use some of these tools that we're talking about now? How do you notice when something's unfair?
I think we feel angry as adults. I think our first instinct is how dare they would be the verbal response. But I think it's comes from anger, hurt. That I can't believe someone was so, and you use the word disrespectful. I think we see it as disrespect, that how dare they turn their back on me, kind of thing. So I think when you feel that angry or disrespected, that's where I would deem the word fair or unfair. And then these are some of the tools that we can live through.
I think that when we feel slighted, right? I'll use that word, right? And where we believe that we were the best option or choice for any given opportunity or situation, but we're not given it to us. I think that's a red flag, a telltale sign for us to say, okay, wow, that was messed up, right? And a lot of us might use that that slang, right? When we feel, well, no, that should have been my promotion. That should have been my raise. I should have gotten the chance to work on that project, but I didn't. It was given to someone else who we feel is either not as qualified as we are or as prepared as we are. And that's when we feel that, it's like, ooh, that's when you kind of stop and say, when you feel you should have had something that someone else got, right? And that's universal, whether it's an adult or a child. That's when the trigger goes off. And you're like, okay, all right, you know what? Fine. They got it, but, and it's tough. It's not easy, but you got to work through that. And figure out, well, what's the next thing going to be? Because then you don't want to get into a position where you just give up, throw your hands up in the air and say, oh, forget it, right? That's immature, right? And that just doesn't get you anywhere.
It sounds like we're talking about that fairness has to do with expectations and expectations being unmet. And I've done a quick hits about expectations before. So I think that's another place to look at what are my expectations of fairness and what does that mean? And unfortunately, we don't have time to have that conversation because that is our 10 minutes. So thank you so much for doing this with me. I appreciate it. I look forward to doing it again very soon.
Thank you.